Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something absolutely fascinating, AppliedXLA and the systems engineering of intimacy. Specifically, we're going to look at combining AppliedXLA with AppliedSLA for erotic reorganization starting points, right in the here and now. And we'll explore how to make this happen through spatial attention reorganization. I know, it sounds super technical, like we're coding a server, right? But honestly, it is the perfect framework to understand the literal mechanics of human connection. Let's figure out how our biological software actually connects, why it sometimes stalls out, and how we can upgrade to a true zero-latency alignment.
So why does modern intimacy sometimes feel like a massive system crash? You know the feeling, right? That overwhelming anxiety, the endless overthinking, where your brain just feels completely stuck? Well, in systems engineering terms, that friction is literally a tracking error. When two unaligned prefrontal circuits try to connect across a distance, our biological software gets caught in this asynchronous lag. You're waiting for validation, they're processing, and boom, the whole system just hangs.
And that hang-up forces us into what's known as linguistic scaffolding. Because you're decoupled from physical closeness, your brain is forced into manual overdrive. You end up paying this grueling metabolic translation tax, you know what I mean? Constantly building these wobbly linguistic bridges using basic childhood prepositions. In Dutch, for example, it's words like en, maar, naar, and, but, towards. You're frantically trying to translate these high-dimensional feelings for an unaligned observer. And here's the crazy part. This manual sorting literally stalls your brain's navigational router, the supramammillary nucleus, or SUM. When your SUM stalls, it fractures your natural theta brainwaves and throws your whole system into a paralyzing dorsovagal freeze. You're just frozen in brain fog.
Okay, so how do we fix a system crash? Well, we have to look at the difference between two operational modes. Over here on the left, we have the trap of applied SLA, service level agreements. If you apply SLA logic to a relationship, you're essentially treating human connection like a rigid IT checklist. It forces this clumsy, blocking, two-phase commit-wait state. You're constantly auditioning, ticking off relationship KPIs, which absolutely spikes your cortisol and breeds high-latency anxiety. But on the right, we have AppliedXLA, experience-level agreements. AppliedXLA optimizes purely for the emotional user experience. It's a static execution graph. There's no if-then dithering, no waiting around. It elegantly compiles your connection into a seamless, unsupervised flow. The result? Instant zero-latency connection.
Now, the key is how we actually shift into that applied XAX mindset, and it requires a major paradigm shift called erotic organization. In developmental biology, an erotic structure isn't bogged down by rigid top-down academic rules or clinical checklists. Instead, it's organized around stable domains of open-ended problem-solving, exploration, and growth. You aren't trying to conform to a specific theory, you're actively navigating fundamental human processes together. It completely bypasses that high-latency transactional swamp we were just talking about.
To really anchor this erotic mindset, there's this fantastic quote from Frank Coyle's Berkeley Ontology. He says, "There is no win, no fail, only make." Man, I love that. It is the exact philosophy we need here. Your shared desire isn't a static database lock or some pass-fail test. It's an active, open-ended make. Intimacy should be built right here, in the here and now, without the exhausting pressure of conditional if-then branches. You aren't negotiating, you're creating.
So, we've got the philosophy down, but what about the hardware? Specifically, the biological hardware hack. How do we physically force our brains out of that dorsovagal freeze? How do we drop that exhausting translation tax and ditch all those wiggling prepositions? Well, it turns out there is a very specific, measurable, physical solution, and it is entirely based on space.
22.86 centimeters, exactly 9 inches. This is not just a random number, guys. This is the precise boundary of the human parapersonal radar. It's the natural distance at which you'd hold a newborn baby or maintain intense eye contact during a deeply important conversation. This specific spatial signal is literally the ultimate biological hack for focus. Why? Because it physically forces your visual cortex to filter out background distractions and direct its undivided attention entirely onto the other person.
This physical proximity triggers what's called spatial attention reorganization. It works in 4 steps.
Step 1, you enter that precise 22.86 centimeter zone. Step 2, your brain automatically filters out external social noise, digital pings, background chatter, it all just fades away. Step 3, this physical closeness triggers a localized spike in motor cortex excitability, which actually lowers your resting motor threshold, or RMT. And finally, step 4, this lower threshold allows that stalled supramammillary nucleus to restart and sync your smooth 6 to 12 hertz theta rhythms. You are quite literally syncing your brainwaves with the other person on bare biological hardware. Incredible, right? But wait, there's a crucial missing feedback loop here, the power of looking inward. So entering that physical space, what theater director Declan Donnellan calls co-acting, removes our external psychological blocks. But a landmark 2026 study from Bar-Ilan University proved that we also absolutely must look inward. We can't just rely on external space. Utilizing interoceptive attention, basically tracking your own internal sensations, is biologically essential to actively shape and regulate our physical nervous systems.
And the data on this is staggering. Just look at this. Voluntarily directing your attention inward to your own bodily sensations yields a massive 90% physiological recovery and stabilization rate. Compare that to a pretty dismal 45.9% when you rely on external distraction. Looking inward acts like a biological shield. It actively engages your top-down parasympathetic vagal pathways, which elevates your heart rate variability and regulates acute inflammation. So tracking your own visceral feelings, it's not a distraction. It's a strictly necessary stabilizing signal.
Now, when you combine that inward stability with outward physical action, you get what we call the lifeguard algorithm. Think about it. If someone is drowning in social noise or anxiety, you don't stand on the beach and run a slow verbal two-phase commit, asking them to fill out a checklist of how they feel, right? No way. You deploy a stark, nonverbal somatic primitive. You dive in. You take a physical action that prompts an inescapable rescue, bypassing those slow prefrontal filters entirely.
A perfect example of this nonverbal bypass is the tactile gummy bear substitution. Okay, I know, it sounds a little silly, but the science is rock solid. Physical objects, like just handing someone a gummy bear, completely bypass the slow naming centers of the brain. In computational terms, it acts exactly like a CS50 scratch block. It's a discrete, motor-invariant action symbol that snaps right onto the observer's mental grid with absolute geometric precision. You aren't explaining your feelings with exhausting words, you are delivering a direct somatic payload that their brain instantly processes.
And taking physical action like that ensures we adhere to the chinchilla scaling guardrail. If you follow AI, you might know the famous 2022 chinchilla scaling laws, which dictate that for a model to reach optimal performance, it needs a strict 1-to-1 compute optimal ratio between its parameters and its training tokens. Well, guess what? The exact same law applies to human intimacy. Your mental parameters, your internal valuation engine, and your physical sensory tokens must scale in a perfect 1-to-1 ratio. If you're separated by distance and relying only on words, your parameters are left undertrained and your system stalls out. You literally need the physical tokens to maintain a synchronized balance.
Which brings us to the really profound etymological root of all this. Algebra, the reunion of broken parts. We've talked a lot about AppliedXLA, or accelerated linear algebra. But if we trace the word algebra back to its 9th century Arabic root, we find al-jabar. It means taking scattered, broken fragments and reuniting them. It takes our traumas, our communication gaps, our messy linguistic scaffolding, and dynamically compiles them into a permanent, unbroken, and uncompromised identity. And that is exactly what AppliedXLA is doing in human connection.
So let's quickly summarize this system upgrade. When you are operating at a distance, your translation tax is incredibly high because you're leaning on all that linguistic scaffolding. Your brain state drops into that dorsovagal freeze and you get a high latency connection. But when you deploy spatial attention reorganization in the here and now, getting right inside that 22.86 centimeter radar, your translation tax drops to 0. Your brain state locks into a smooth 6 to 12 hertz theta rhythm and your connection latency is 0. Instant execution. The physical action literally becomes the algorithm.
And this right here is the ultimate climax of the AppliedXLA framework. When true physical, somatic alignment is achieved, somatic execution takes over 100% of the processing. That translation tax, the need for all those exhausting childhood prepositions, it shrinks and drops to exactly 0. You are no longer wasting precious metabolic energy trying to translate your reality because the physical action has flawlessly executed the connection on bare biological hardware. So I want to leave you with a provocative thought to chew on today. We've seen the math, we've looked at the neurobiology, and we understand the systems engineering behind true connection. If the physical action is indeed the algorithm, What exhausting words, what messy linguistic scaffolding are you currently holding onto in your own life that you just need to drop? Sometimes the absolute best upgrade you can make to your relationships is to simply close the distance, enter the here and now, and let the action do the talking. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.